Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to try to take your readings for this week, which is pages 73 to 79 in your text, and we're going to try and put the feet to it so that you have a better understanding of it. And as we do so, it will help you be able to answer some of the questions that are going to be posed at the end of the reading in your learning activities, and you can use them for your journal entries and other assignments as we move forward in the course. So let's take a look at what pages 73 to 79 in your text have to say. It gives you the knowledge base for teaching, and there's the reference at Shulman 1986. And when you look at it, okay, you see that there's actually 7 of them, different things that contribute to the teacher's knowledge base and how they amass knowledge in order to teach their content. You have, the pedagogical knowledge, curriculum knowledge, content knowledge, knowledge of learners, their characteristics, and basically, I don't think this is telling you anything that you don't already know. But just as a matter of information, sometimes kids will say to us, well, why do we have to learn this? Having the ability to answer that question makes it much easier for the child to go forward educationally, because now he's motivated and now he at least has a reason for learning it. And we get that question periodically all the time. So let's look at content knowledge. How are you planning? How are you planning your lessons? Is it organized? Do you have everything ready? Are you ready to deal with the content in a way that flows? This is called substantive knowledge, substantive structures. How well can you put this together? Syntactic structures are answers that question that the student asked you. In other words, why do we have to learn this? And if you can answer that, you'll be ahead of the game. Validity and reliability within the content and why it's worth knowing. And we have to have, other than the fact that the state says we have to teach certain subject areas and cover certain content, we have to understand the reasons why certain topics are taught within the content. I'm a big believer in the fact there's certain things that everybody should know. We should know who the president is right now and who they were in the past. From the first all the way up to the present. Who are the presidents? Depending on what state you live in, you should know the counties. You should know how to read a map. You should have the ability to understand, the House of Representatives, understand how to read street signs. All of this, and I know a lot of this is taught, within certain content of certain context of subject areas. But the bottom line is, okay, do we focus on it enough within certain topics to make sure kids get and understand what we're trying to do? Do they understand the salient points and the peripheral points? And do they know why they have to learn it? Curriculum knowledge. Do you know what your resources are? And do you have the right tools to be able to teach this, the content that you have? As you go through at this time of year, and probably at the end of last year, you're going through your ordering process, ordering your textbooks and so on. Do you have the right tools there to be able to teach the content that you want? And can you work with other teachers and create a thematic unit that covers one topic? Can you incorporate the content of a subject into other content areas? And years ago, that's what we did. We taught thematic units. So one topic may have been covered in 4 or 5 different subject areas, and it was a way of ingraining the information into our heads. And we saw it from several different perspectives, which made it far easier to remember. Pedagogical knowledge, understanding your audience and how they learn. I'll ask you this question. Do you know who's in front of you? Do you know what's going on with your students? Do you know how they learn? If they're visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile learners? Can you diversify instruction? Do you know who the students in the class who are included? Do you know how you're going to address their needs? Understanding the audience. Who's sitting out there? And do I have the ability to engage each kid on their level and use their strongest learning style in order to be able to teach them my content? Then, of course, you use metaphors, illustrations. This is all part of how I teach, the use of illustrations. Showing kids, what it really looks like. Using something that's familiar to them throughout their day and in their life. Can we use a short story to make our point? Can we use an analogy to make our points as we teach the content? Now, the knowledge base of the learner is important strictly because we want to know where they are when they come into our classroom. You can't teach long division before you teach multiplication. And often we try to teach certain subjects because they're part of our grade level to students who don't have the necessary prerequisite skills. And I will say this, if there's one form of testing that needs to be done, probably a whole lot more than it is right now, that would be diagnostic testing, just to figure out where this kid is when he comes into my class. Because I may have to reteach certain content in order for him to understand what's going on in my class. Do we know the social and emotional condition of the student? Do we know if he's having a bad day? Do we know if he may have emotional problems? Do we know about parental situations? And I know, you don't have to tell me. I know that they talk a whole lot about confidentiality and all these other things because they don't want to make us aware of what's really going on with the kid. You have the guidance counselor's aware of it and they work with the kid. We are more part of the learning process, but understanding some of these issues that kids might have. How safe does the kid feel in your classroom? Is he having difficulty with his peers? Is he socially awkward? And we have to understand students' behavior. There's an old saying, we spend 80% of our time dealing with 20% of the kids. We need to understand the student's behavior and how it impacts his learning, but moreover, how it impacts the learning of the other students. And we have to take the necessary steps in order to make sure that the learning of the other students in your classroom isn't affected by 1 or 2 students. Knowledge of educational ends. Asking the question, are we educating our students for the short term which is basically some of the stuff we do today, getting them through an assignment or a test in order to move on to the next level, or are we trying to help them have lifelong success? No learning actually takes place unless the student has memorized the information. And kids can pass a test for a variety of reasons. Teacher could be benevolent, they could cheat, they could get lucky. There's a lot of reasons, why someone passes a test. But in reality, okay, if we're going to educate for the long haul, memorization has got to be part of what we do. Because then if we give that youngster the same test 24 to 48 hours later and he still remembers it, you know that he's committed to the long-term memory. So we have to ask ourselves this question: are we educating for the short term or the long term? And we can do both. Sometimes because of some of the mandates involved with state testing, we have to educate for the short term, but there's certain things we have to educate for the long term, and we have to prepare students so that when they leave us, they have certain things committed to memory and they're ready to progress with life. Educational context, understanding the school environment, who the stakeholders are, who the stakeholders are involved in creating an optimum learning environment, and how are class size, curriculum, school rules, and the running of the school administratively determined. These are two tough questions that teachers, I think in answering the first one, we'd like to know who our boss is, and we'd like to know that he has an open door policy and that he could go in and help us out if we have any difficulty with students or a process or some type of policy that the school has. Class sizes sometimes are determined by law. Curriculum at times gets determined by the Board of Education. School rules are set up by a variety of different people. Sometimes the Board of Ed, you have the principal, but when you think about school rules, what goes in society should go in school. And I think if we just wrapped our head around three things, everyone has to be respectful, responsible, and we have to comply with those that are in charge, we'd be okay. But some of this stuff might be a little bit difficult for us to get involved with, so I do want you to understand that. Now we're on to page 77 to 79. Those who understand, those who can do, those who understand, teach. Well, basically what this means is once you learn something or once you've taught something, you actually are committing it to long-term memory once you teach it. So if we can, those who can, they will do it. Those who understand it, really understand it, teach. And they argue that such understanding must necessarily also incorporate judgment and action, as comprehension alone is insufficient. Now, take a look at what we have here. And this is pages 77 to 79 in your text. Comprehension, transformation, instruction, evaluation. These are all pieces, and I'm just going to go through all of these and I'm going to come back to them. That should be part of our process in educating our students. Then you have reflection, new comprehension. That's the end of the session there, but we're going to back up here. Comprehension. Do you know what you're teaching, and do you know all there is to know about it? Very basic. Know what you're teaching and know all there is to know about it. I've often told my own students, my graduate students, you as a teacher you have to be well read because you don't know when you're going to get asked a question and you want to have answers. Transformation, the ability to transform content in order to meet the needs of all learners. We understand that. We just went through that. What we're trying to do here, okay, is take the content and adjust it so that it will meet the needs of the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile learner. It'll meet the needs of kids who may have some type of handicapping condition. Can we adjust our content in that way? Instruction is where the rubber meets the road, where we understand what we have to teach, and we know how to adapt the content. And then how well we evaluate. And there's, really, you have only a few forms of evaluative methods. I mean, observation is one of them. Using summative, which is like a unit test. Formative, which is something that you do every day. You give a short quiz maybe if you want to see where kids are in the process of learning. Obtrusive and unobtrusive. Obtrusive is you are observing them. Unobtrusive methods of evaluation are used when you're observing them and they don't know. Obtrusive, they know. Unobtrusive, they don't know. I actually stopped this video in order to just double check on obtrusive and unobtrusive. Unobtrusive assessment is done discreetly, where students don't know that they're being assessed. Obtrusive is an assessment that's done where the students know it. So I wanted to be sure that I had the right information there, because there are ways that we evaluate, and we want to make sure that even though we may not give a test, we can look at a student, we can use observation, we can be unobtrusive, and we can gather a lot of information just from watching a student and noticing how motivated he appears, and if in fact he really cares about the teaching that's going on. And then we have reflection. In essence, learning from experiences and making adjustments is needed. And therein lies the key word, adjustment. My feeling is you consistently reflect in order to make consistent adjustments as needed. You reflect consistently. You review. You take a look at what you're doing, what worked and what didn't. If it works, great. If it didn't work, that's where you make your adjustments. And the new comprehension, how do we build on what the students now have learned? This is key, because as kids move from grade to grade, we want to make sure that they have all the necessary prerequisite skills in order to take on the challenges of the new content. That's the end of the session. What you're going to do now is you're going to complete the activities associated with this presentation.